Chapter 18. The Stimulating Effects of Tea. The East India Company was a major subsidizer of the Jesuit mission to Beijing. The Jesuits in turn interceded with Oriental monarchs to secure lucrative commercial favors for the company, including monopolies on tea, spices, saltpeter for explosives, silks, and the world's opium trade. Indeed, the company appears to owe its very existence to the Society of Jesus. How this came to be is worth a digression. Saucy goes on to describe the history of the British East India Company starting in 1583. But I wanted to learn more about these Jesuit China missions, so allow me to take my own digression here. To start, we're going to sail through the official narrative of the Age of Discovery. It started with the fall of Constantinople, May 29, 1453, effectively marking the end of the Roman Empire, which lasted from 27 BC for 1500 years. The capture of Constantinople, the city which marked the divide between Europe and Asia Minor, also allowed the Ottomans more effectively to invade mainland Europe. Overland Afro-Eurasian trade routes gave way to maritime trade. It's considered the end of the medieval period and the beginning of the Renaissance. Influx of Byzantine scholars to Italy was key to the revival of Greek and Roman studies that led to the development of Renaissance humanism. It all started with Prince Henry the Navigator, the central figure in the Portuguese Empire, regarded as the main initiator of the Age of Discovery. He was the son of John of Eze, of the Order of Eze. Henry was made the Grand Master of the Military Order of Christ, which were the Portuguese Templars. Here's his route that he took down Western Africa, and the caravel that he invented. And he was also preoccupied with finding Prester John, a legendary Christian Nestorian patriarch and king said to rule over a Christian nation lost amid the pagans and Muslims in the Orient. Portuguese explorers came to believe that they had found him in Ethiopia. Here's the Silk Road and the spice trade routes, later blocked by the Ottoman Empire, spurring exploration to find alternative sea routes. The next crucial breakthrough was in 1488 when the Portuguese explorer Bartolomeu Dias, in search of a trade route to India, rounded the southern tip of Africa, which he named the Cape of Storms. In 1492, the Catholic monarchs of Castile and Aragon funded the Genoese mariner Christopher Columbus's plan to sail west to reach the Indies by crossing the Atlantic. And he happened to die on May 20th, which is the Jesuit holy day, where St. Ignatius Loyola had his leg shattered by a French cannonball. A very important date, May 20th. Here's his copy of the Travels of Marko Polo with his own notes. And the Amerigo Vespucci, who they say America was named after, but that's rather spurious. The Treaty of Tordesillas, signed on June 7, 1494, divided the newly discovered lands outside Europe between the Portuguese Empire and the Spanish Empire, along the meridian 370 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands. So this is the Portuguese Empire's hemisphere, and you see that it does come through Brazil. That's why Brazil is Portuguese. And here is the Spanish Empire, including the Americas and the Philippines and half of Australia. Here's another picture of the line of demarcation between the Crown of Castile and the Portuguese Empire. It was ratified by Pope Julius II. Vasco da Gama's discovery of the sea route to India opened the way for an age of global imperialism and enabled the Portuguese to establish a long-lasting colonial empire along the way from Africa to Asia. And he was of the Grand Master. He was of the Order of Santiago. King John II was the Grand Master. Here he is leaving Lisbon, and here's the route he took around Africa and up to Goa and Calicut. Pedro Alvares Cabral was a Portuguese navigator regarded as the European discoverer of Brazil, as the new land was within the Portuguese sphere according to the Treaty of Tordesillas. Cabral claimed it for the Portuguese crown. East-west exploration overlapped in 1522 when a Castilian or Spanish expedition led by Portuguese navigator Ferdinand Magellan completed the first circumnavigation of the world. And he originally wanted to do it for King Manuel of Portugal, but he was rejected, so he did it for Charles V of Spain. He was in the Order of Santiago as well. And here is his circumnavigation around the planet, quote unquote. This is the Victoria, the sole ship of Magellan's fleet to complete the circumnavigation, in an Ortelius map, 1590. And here is that map. He apparently named the Pacific Ocean Maris Pacifici. Here is the Victoria. New Spain was served by the Manila galleon trade. The Manila galleon, they were also known as La Nao de la China, the Chinese ships, on their voyages from the Philippines because they carried mostly Chinese goods shipped from Manila. And here's the route they took from Manila to Acapulco and then on through to Europe. Andreas de Urdaneta was the explorer who founded this trade route. Through the Manila galleon trade, Spanish traders brought large amounts of Chinese porcelain, lacquer, textiles, and spices from Chinese merchants based in Manila to new Spanish markets in Acapulco, Panama, and Lima. Though usually understood as a European style, Chinoiserie was a global phenomenon. In the late half of the 17th century, the Jesuits played a major role in the exchange of information with these Chinese empire and its culture. Here is Athanasius Kircher's China Illustrata, and these are azulejo tiles, which were Chinese-inspired and fabricated in Mexico. More azulejos tiles in the Plaza de España. Talavera pottery is Mexican pottery with Chinese style, and a Vienna porcelain jug. Chinoiserie is also still an important style to elite interior decorators today. And this is a Chippendale desk, also in the Chinoiserie style. And finally, the Royal Pavilion in Brighton. Marko Polo was a Venetian merchant, explorer, and writer who traveled through Asia along the Silk Road between 1271 and 1295. Here he is wearing a Tartar outfit. He wrote Il Milione, in English known as The Travels of Marko Polo. He lived in Cathay, or China, for 17 years. And here's a page from Il Milione. Here is his father and uncle and himself crossing Asia, where they met Kublai Khan of the Yuan dynasty in Cathay. And this is the Carta Catalana, 1375, the first European Mappa Mundi to include Cathay. John of Montecorvino was an Italian Franciscan missionary, the first Catholic bishop in Cathay, the Archbishop of Peking, or Beijing, long before the Jesuits arrived. Alfonso de Albuquerque advanced the threefold Portuguese grand scheme of combating Islam, spreading Christianity, and securing the trade of spices by establishing a Portuguese empire, Asian empire. He led the conquest of Goa in 1510 and the capture of Malacca in 1511. Portugal was the first European nation to establish trade routes with Japan and China. And here's the route they took to Goa, Malacca, the Strait of Malacca. These are the Spice Islands, Macao in southern China, and Nagasaki in Japan. So the Spanish Empire was a colonies empire, and the Portuguese Empire was a trading one. The Spanish Empire was total military victory, followed by colonization. Conquest of the West Indies, or the New World, included the imposition of the Roman Catholic religion by force of arms, forced conversion. And the Portuguese Empire emphasized the creation of trading and diplomatic posts, the East Indies, strategy of cultural adaptation before conversion, which was the Jesuit strategy in China. So here's a comparison of their routes. In blue is the Portuguese routes, and in white is the Spanish galleon route. One more look at the line of demarcation. So in 1540, Ignatius of Loyola founds the Society of Jesus with the exclusive obedience to the Pope and independent of all secular rule. Freedom from typical monastic vows provided geographical and social mobility. That same year, Loyola sent his most effective disciple, Francis Xavier, to convert Asia with the alternative policy of accommodation or adaptation to local customs. And here is Xavier with his hand on the globe. Ignatius's plan for the order was approved by Pope Paul III in 1540. Francis's primary mission, as ordered by King John III, was to restore Christianity among the increasingly dissolute Portuguese settlers. In 1540, King John of Portugal had Pedro Mascarenhas, Portuguese ambassador to the Holy See, request Jesuit missionaries to spread the faith of his new possessions in India, where the king believed that Christian values were eroding among the Portuguese. Ignatius promptly appointed Nicolas Bobadilla and Simão Rodrigues for the Asian mission. At the last moment, however, Bobadilla became seriously ill. With some hesitance and uneasiness, Ignatius asked Francis to go in Bobadilla's place. Thus Francis Xavier began his life as the first Jesuit missionary almost accidentally. Leaving Rome on March 15, 1540, in the ambassador's train, Francis took with him a breviary, a catechism, and a book, De Institutione Bene Vivende, by Croatian humanist Marko Marulić. It was the only book that Francis read or studied. So it's a very important book. Let's have a look at it. It's called The Instructions on How to Lead a Virtuous Life Based on the Examples of the Saints. And that sounds a lot like Saint Ignatius reading the golden legend, The Life of the Saints, while he was convalescing from his leg wound. He was called the Croatian Shakespeare or the Croatian Dante. He was a poet, lawyer, judge, and Renaissance humanist who coined the term psychology. Marko Marulić was a nobleman born on August 18, 1450, in the Dalmatian city of Split. So here's Split. It happens to be part of the Republic of Venice. This whole area is called Illyria, and this is the Kingdom of Croatia. Marco Polo was also a Dalmatian, and Marulić was a very important part of the Croatian Renaissance, along with Giulio Clovio. And the flag of Dalmatia looks a lot like the Ukrainian flag. Interesting. Francis arrived in Goa in 1542. The Portuguese Empire in the East, with its capital in Goa, was then often styled in Europe as the Rome of the East. Here are some Portuguese women in Goa in the 16th century. The Jesuits established the first printing press in Asia in Goa in 1556 at the Jesuit College of St. Paul in Old Goa. And here is the ruins of the old college, founded circa 1442 by Francis Xavier. Here he is converting some of the native Indians. The procession of the Portuguese Inquisition in Goa entered the church with standards and banners, the auto de fe, from Portuguese meaning act of faith. Some claim that the Inquisition was requested by Francis Xavier, but no real evidence exists. Only a letter from Malacca, or Malaysia, dated 16 May 1546 to King John III of Portugal, which asks for the king's minister with powers to protect new converts from ill treatment by Portuguese commandants. Here are the voyages of St. Francis Xavier. And interesting to note that Professor X of the X-Men is named Charles Francis Xavier. Makes you wonder who really the X-Men are. Francis reputedly converted more people than anyone else had done since Paul the Apostle. Francis devoted much of his life to missions in Asia, mainly in 4 centers: Malacca, the Spice Islands, Japan, and offshore China. So here is Malaysia, or Malacca, with his church in the back. This is the Strait of Malacca right here. These are the Spice Islands. You can see where they are in the globe. He arrived in Japan in 1549. He realized the key to converting Japan would be the conversion of its ruling elite, rather than ministering to the poor and sick as he'd done in Goa. Since Japanese culture was based on Chinese culture, the key to converting both was to be found in China. He died aboard a ship in 1552 while waiting for permission to enter China. Every 10 years in Goa, his corpse is displayed. And the right forearm, which Xavier used to bless and baptize his converts, was detached by Superior General Claudio Acquaviva in 1614. It has been displayed ever since in a silver reliquary at the main Jesuit church in Rome, Il Gesù. Here's the Portuguese Empire from 1415 until 1999. Of the 920 Jesuits who served in the China mission between 1552 and 1800, only the Italian Matteo Ricci, or Li Mado, remains well known. This is understandable. It was Ricci who first gained permission for the Jesuits to live in Beijing, and who established the example of respect for Chinese traditions and adaptation to Chinese customs that came to characterize their mission. The Kangxi emperor called this Ricci's tradition and obliged all missionaries to follow it. Ricci introduced Western music, math, science to China, and Chinese philosophy, history, and culture to Europe. He spoke and wrote fluent Chinese and seems to have been beloved by all who knew him. Nowadays he is effectively the secular saint of Sinology, and indeed is under consideration for actual sainthood by the Vatican. He was born the same year that Francis Xavier died. He went to Macao to learn Chinese and to begin his studies of Chinese culture. Ricci entered the Society of Jesus April of 1574 at the Roman College, where he studied astronomy under the direction of Christopher Clavius. So this is the astronomy that Ricci brought to China. Christopher Clavius was a proponent of the Gregorian calendar and head of the mathematics at College Romano. The books of Clavius were translated into Chinese by his student Matteo Ricci, and his influence for the development of science in China was crucial. Clavius wrote a commentary on the most important astronomical textbook of the late Middle Ages, De Sphera, of Johannes de Sacrobosco. The commentary by Clavius was one of the most influential astronomy textbooks of its time. And this is Johannes de Sacrobosco, or John of Holywood. The sphere they were referring to was the celestial sphere, and this is the armillary. Though it did contain a clear description of the earth as a sphere. The father of the China mission was one Alessandro Valignano, an Italian Jesuit priest and missionary who helped supervise the introduction of Catholicism to the Far East, the greatest man of the Jesuit missions of the East after Francis Xavier. Valignano formed the basic strategy for Catholic proselytism, which is usually called adaptionism or cultural accommodation, as well as linguistic immersion. Valignano led his mission, including Ruggieri and Ricci, first to Goa, then Macao. He sent Ruggieri and Ricci onto Ming Dynasty mainland China. They were the first Chinese missionaries to enter. So Valignano founded St. Paul's College in Macao. And this is Michele Ruggieri, one of the founding fathers of the Jesuit China mission and co-author of the first European Chinese dictionary. He can be described as the first European sinologist. So he and Matteo Ricci wrote this Portuguese Chinese dictionary between 1583 and 1588. The Jesuits, including Ricci, first arrived in China in the late Ming Dynasty. And the Ming Dynasty was when the Forbidden City was built, as well as the Great Wall of China. They traveled from Goa to Macao, arriving in 1582. So here is the route they took from Goa and the Strait of Malacca on up to Macao. There's another image of Portuguese Macao. And the Ming Dynasty, the use of Macao as a commercial port dated back to 1535 during the Ming Dynasty. Here is another work of Michele Ruggieri, The Atlas of China. When they first arrived, they dressed as peasants, but the Confucian literati elite were not impressed. The priests soon exchanged their peasant garb for shenyi, or the robes of the Confucian scholars. Once Ricci had sufficient linguistic command and felt comfortable in the Confucian curriculum, he set out to impress the literati with a mix of moral, religious, and scientific teachings, eventually dubbed Tianshu, or celestial teachings. Matteo Ricci lays out his arguments for why 16th century Confucians in China should actually declare themselves Christians. He does so in Chinese, presenting arguments based on Confucianism as if it were just a slightly misguided version of the same true Christian faith. Another example of the celestial teaching was the Cor Jesu. Jesuit emblematica in China, didactic, catechetical tools in missionary work based on the model of spiritual formation. The moral betterment of the spiritual exercises fit well with the Confucian discourse of self-cultivation. This Cor Jesu series resonated with the Chinese notion of Xin, or mind-heart. The Xin determines the balance between the moral virtues of Confucianism on the one hand and the emotions on the other. Andrius Rudamina was the first Lithuanian Jesuit missionary in China, and he taught the core Jesu to the Confucians. Valignano expounded the doctrine known as propagation fide per scientias, or propagating the faith through science. European clocks lavishly decorated examples of high-tech automata. Matteo Ricci conceived the idea of awing the emperor with mechanical clocks and then persuading him and his subjects to convert to Christianity. He presented them to the Wanli emperor of the Ming Dynasty. And more propagating the faith through the sciences. Johann Schreck, Galileo's friend in China, was a German Jesuit missionary to China and polymath. He is credited with the development of scientific technical terminology in Chinese. And here is his book, The Diagrams and Explanations of Wonderful Machines of the Far West, 1627. And the field mill. Sabatino de Ursus arrived in 1607 Beijing in order to help Matteo Ricci with astronomical research. De Ursus is famous for having predicted an eclipse which had not been foretold by traditional Chinese astronomers on December 15, 1610. And here is his Chinese book on Western hydraulics, describing the European force pump. And here is the first global atlas available in Chinese by de Ursus. They also brought Western art and perspective to the Chinese courts. Giuseppe Castiglione, who adopted the name Long Shining, Peace of the World, was an Italian Jesuit, lay brother, and missionary in China, where he served as an artist in the imperial court of 3 Qing emperors. He painted in a fusion style of European and Chinese traditions. He also designed the Old Summer Palace, formal European gardens in the Western Mansions section. Here are the ruins today. It was 8 times the size of the Vatican City. Here's a portrait of the Empress by Castiglione. In 1601, Ricci became the first foreigner from the West to enter the Forbidden City and was granted permission to establish a mission in Peking. He was first to introduce Western astronomy to the imperial court. He was called the Apostle of Enculturation. And because the crucifix offended the Confucian sensibilities, they often just displayed the Madonna and Child. Here's a Chinese stylized Madonna and Child. Here is Zhu Guanji. In Macao, Ricci studied the Chinese language and customs, one of the first Western scholars to master Chinese script and classical Chinese. Zhu Guanxi, or Paul, was a Chinese agronomist, astronomer, mathematician, and writer during the Ming Dynasty. He was one of the 3 pillars of Chinese Catholicism. Here are the other 2. Science and technology was the way to attract Chinese intelligentsia into entering the Catholic Church. However, they were Confucians at heart. Catholicism had been understood and interpreted in a Confucian way. Chinese Confucians used the Catholic teaching to renew the Chinese tradition and culture, namely, to complement Confucianism and to replace Buddhism. He's on his way to becoming a saint, Zhu Guanxi. Here's Ricci and Zhu. They undertook the translation and transcription of the first 6 books of Euclid's Elements. The treatise on geometry was published in Beijing, 1614. So now the Jesuits are bringing the Ratio Studiorum to Asia. They brought Aristotle to Asia in the form of the Cursus Conimbricensis, and it's a compilation of Aristotle's work brought from the University of Coimbra in Portugal. Western cartography was introduced to China by Matteo Ricci, who produced the Kunyu Wangguo Quantu, China's first world map, in 1602. Printed in the Ming China at the request of the Wanli Emperor in 1602. It is the world's earliest known Chinese world map, with the style of European maps, showing China at the center of the known world. Here's a small-scale polar projection version displayed in the top first left panel of the first Chinese world map. And in 1584, Ricci created the first ever Chinese map of the world, the rare, important, and exotic Impossible Black Tulip, it was called. Here is Matteo Ricci's way from Macao to Beijing. And this is his cathedral in Beijing. Building commenced in 1605 in the Ming Dynasty and completed in 1650 under Adam Schall von Bell in the Qing Dynasty. Ricci died in Beijing in 1610. Du Halde, this is a very important emblem from the geographical, historical, chronological, political, and physical description of the Empire of China and Chinese Tartary by Jean-Baptiste Du Halde. He did not travel to China, but collected 17 Jesuit missionaries' reports and provided an encyclopedic survey of the history, culture, and society of China and Chinese Tartary, that is, Manchuria. So the top left, we have Ricci, who entered in the Ming Dynasty, and the rest are Qing Dynasty. In the middle, this is Adam Schall von Bell. This is Ferdinand Verbiest. Verbiest was Schall's successor, later awarded head of the Astronomical Bureau. The bottom left, we have Paul Zhu Guanxi. And on the right, we have Candida Xu, granddaughter of Xu Guanxi, patroness of the Jesuit mission. And we'll get to all of these presently. Candida Xu was a Chinese Catholic. She has been called the most influential Chinese Christian woman of the 17th century. Widowed at 46, she turned her attention to service to the church. She had a private income from which she donated generously to finance living arrangements for missionaries. She also funded the building of 40 churches and chapels and facilitated publication of many religious works in the Chinese language. She was referred to as the Apostle of China by many. Her story gained currency in Europe through a biography by Philip Couplet, her confessor. Philip Couplet was a Flemish Jesuit missionary to the Qing Empire. He wrote Confucius, Philosopher of the Chinese, or Chinese Knowledge Explained in Latin, in 1687. Upon his return to Europe in 1685, Couplet brought with him a Chinese convert, Michael Shen, one of the first Chinese men known to visit Europe. Francis Ferdinand Verbiest was a Flemish Jesuit missionary in China during the Qing Dynasty. Science as a preliminary step to religious conversion. Here's the Imperial Observatory in Beijing. The observatory was built during the Ming Dynasty in 1442 to facilitate both astronomical purposes and seafaring navigation. It was refitted in late 17th century by the Jesuits, supervised by Ferdinand Verbiest. a special advisor to the Qing court regarding the correction of the Chinese calendar. Tycho Brahe's Mechanica in 1598 had a strong influence on Verbiest, and hence the instruments were based on Brahe's designs. During the fall of the Ming dynasty to Qing dynasty, the new regime required a reformed calendar, as the welfare of the empire was connected to the movement of the stars. Here is Verbiest's complete map of the world in 1674, all in Chinese. The great empire of Qing included Tibet, and here is the Qing dynasty flag. Could it be another Vatican dragon? Johann Adam Schall von Bell was a German Jesuit and astronomer. He spent most of his life as a missionary in China and became advisor to Shunzi Emperor of the Qing dynasty. After the Ming-Qing transition in 1644, Schall von Bell gained access to the newly installed Shunzi Emperor and became one of his trusted counselors. He was made a mandarin and held an important post in connection with the mathematical school, director of the Imperial Observatory and the Tribunal of Mathematics. In 1618, Schall left for China on a Portuguese ship with a group of missionaries under the lead of Nicolas Trigault. They reached the Portuguese trading port of Macao, where Schall von Bell spent some time learning Chinese. Here he is in his mandarin robes. A mandarin was a bureaucrat scholar in the history of China. The cranes on his mandarin square indicate that he was a civil official of the 6th rank. Schall died August 15, 1666. Here he is in his mandarin robe with the crane. Always the celestial globe and the armillary. Chinese Tartary, that is Manchuria, is an archaic geographical term used especially during the time of the Qing dynasty. The term Tartar was used by Europeans to refer to ethnicities living around China's north, northeast, and west, including the Mongols, Mon, Tibetans, Central Asians, and even the Japanese. By the 17th century, however, largely under the influence of Catholic missionary writings, the word Tartar came to refer to the Manchus and the land they ruled as Tartary. Here's the Kangxi Emperor, the 3rd emperor of the Qing dynasty, and he was portrayed very similarly to the Sun King, Louis XIV, his contemporary. This is from the Jesuit Louis Lecomte's Nouveaux Memories. De Christiana Expeditione apud Sinas, based on an Italian manuscript written by Matteo Ricci and translated by Nicolas Trigault, based on the premise of the essential compatibility between Christianity and Confucianism. And this book puts forward, could it be that the familiar and beloved figure of Confucius was invented by Jesuit priests? I would think so. Confucius, or Master Kong. Confucianism emphasized personal and governmental morality, correctness of social relationships, justice, kindness, sincerity. Confucianism was part of the Chinese social fabric and way of life. To Confucians, everyday life was the arena of religion. His followers competed with many other schools during the hundred schools of thought era, between which flourished from the 6th century BC to 221 BC, during the spring-autumn period. Here is a portrayal of Confucius together with Moses and Mohammed among the greatest legislators of the past. Another important Jesuit in the China mission was Athanasius Kircher, German Jesuit scholar and polymath, who published around 40 major works, most notably in the fields of comparative religion, geology, medicine, and medicine. Kircher himself had never been to China, but compiled the oral and written reports of former Jesuit missionaries to publish a summary of the knowledge of China. Here's his China Illustrata, featuring Adam Shaw von Bell and Matteo Ricci. And here's St. Ignatius and St. Francis on top. Costumes of the Tartars. And is this some sort of Chinese Janus? In 1600, the first Jesuits reached Beijing, and the East India Company was founded in London. Here's a map of 200-odd Jesuit churches and missions established across China in 1687. Here's a rundown of the dynasties, the latest one being the Qing dynasty with the Manchu invaders. Before that was the Ming dynasty, the Forbidden City and the Great Wall. European traders arrived. The Yuan dynasty of Genghis Khan and his grandson Kublai Khan and Marko Polo. The Song dynasty, where paper money was and the invention of compass. Tang dynasty was the Silk Road trade. Sui dynasty, we had gunpowder, the Grand Canal, and great transportation. The Han dynasty of Buddhism. Qin dynasty, China into one empire. The Zhao dynasty, iron castings and Confucius, and the Shang dynasty. I believe it's probably all just a grand Jesuit fabrication. Here's an interesting video about Francis Xavier, narrated by Liam Neeson, and he is a very big part of Jesuit Hollywood. In the 2016 historical drama directed by Martin Scorsese called Silence, the plot follows two 17th century Jesuit priests who travel from Portugal to Japan via Macao to locate their missing mentor and spread Catholic Christianity. It features St. Paul's College in Macao and the Italian Jesuit priest Alessandro Valignano. And here's Martin Scorsese getting very close with the Pope.